Welcome to the evolution of communication and interpersonal communication. My name is Russell Stockert. I'm a professor of communication at California Lutheran University. I started in 1991. I also teach marketing in the School of Management. In this presentation, we want to share knowledge that thinkers and writers have developed about communication. We will start by briefly looking at the evolution and history of communication. This look will help us understand the importance of communication. Then we'll investigate relationships between people and communication. This will lead us to discuss interpersonal communication. Finally, we'll define communication. When we think of education and culture, our minds often go to the written word, which is certainly vital to the production of knowledge by professional writers and scholars, as well as communication by ordinary people, writing letters, and more recently, email and Twitter. However, written communication, while extremely important for the preservation of culture and the conduct of business activities, doesn't constitute all human communication. Oral communication helps distinguish pre-literate humans from their close relatives, primates or apes, and form the basis for stories about the origin of various people. So, both written and oral communication are important for us as we communicate with each other. Why don't you think back to the previous slide with three drawings? The last picture showed two people with their backs to each other, appearing to be engaged with their cell phones, not with each other. Take another look at the two people. What does this picture suggest? As we look at the drawing of the man and woman on their cell phones at the bottom, what do we think? Now that you've taken another look at the picture, what do you think? Are these people in a relationship but prioritizing texting others or checking their Facebook pages? Are they texting each other instead of communicating face-to-face? Now that we've seen about the connection between communication and relationships, we're ready to find out about interpersonal communication. According to Wilson, Hance, and Hanna, interpersonal communication is a transactional process of exchanging information and negotiating meaning to convey information and to establish and maintain relationships. Please note that in this definition we stress not only the exchange of messages, but also their joint interpretation and negotiation. This definition includes some ideas that we need to explore and explain at greater length. Interpersonal means between people. Interpersonal communication generally takes place face-to-face. Interpersonal communication involving two people is known as dyadic communication. Communication definitions. There are two understandings of communication. Most common is the idea that it is a process of exchanging or transmitting messages. Using this definition, scholars have developed important models of communication which have been helpful in highly technical communication systems such as radio, television, and computer-assisted communication. A second common and more complex but more interesting understanding is that communication involves the meaning of messages, their interpretation as well as their transmission. Meaning thus is a function of the interaction between communicators. This second definition is more interesting as we pursue our study of interpersonal communication. Here's a transmission communication model. Here's a diagram from a primer on communication studies that shows communication as transmission of messages. It is also known as a sender-message-receiver model, which emphasizes transmission of a message through a channel from a sender to a receiver. Messages have to be encoded or put into language that both sender and receiver can understand. This model also includes a feedback channel, which allows the receiver to respond to the message. Communication can also be shared meaning. Here's a diagram that reflects the definition of communication based on shared or co-creation of meaning. This model contributes various contexts for communication. These include the physical and psychological, social, cultural, and relational. Transactional. The term transactional suggests that the messages from persons engaged in the act of communication are being sent and received simultaneously. This happens because most people monitor and process the other person's reactions while they are communicating. Let's imagine a hypothetical situation. If you ask another person for a date, that person may respond with an inviting smile and pleasant facial expression that suggests that the person is receptive. If you proceed to suggest a movie, you might notice an almost imperceptible frown. This leads you to ask, would you rather do something else? What's going on here is an exchange back and forth, though the other person didn't utter a single word. Meaning and symbols. Transaction also suggests a mutual negotiation of meaning. Each and every episode of interpersonal communication is a reciprocal event whose meaning is negotiated by participants. In fluent conversations, we use signs and symbols as we talk with each other. A sign is something that indicates something else. It announces a natural relationship, such as dark clouds heralding rain. A symbol is something that stands for something else, such as the word chair symbolizes the actual object. The word process is used to suggest that interpersonal communication is an ongoing and continually changing phenomenon. When you talk with another person, the act of talking changes both you and the other person. As you experience this growth process, as you learn, as your self-concept evolves, and as your image of the relationship develops, you alter your basic assumptions, as does the other person. Messages. A message, another key concept in our definition, is a symbol or combination of signs or symbols that serves as a stimulus for a receiver. These messages may be auditory, such as language and vocal cues, or visual, such as body, face, and eye movements. They may also be tactile if we communicate by touch. We may even communicate by using our surroundings, how we place objects or arrange furnishings, or the clothes we wear. Information. The term information has spurred much interest in communication studies. Some scholars believe information deals with the amount of uncertainty and unpredictability that persons experience in a situation. When a situation is completely unpredictable, we lack new information. This view of information may be somewhat confusing, however, because it has nothing to do with messages, facts, or meaning. Instead, it suggests the number of messages required to eliminate all uncertainty in a situation. Other scholars have argued that information must be more human. They focus on the notion that anything conveyed in a communication that reduces uncertainty and increases predictability is information. The second way to understand information is closer to our definition of the term as anything in a communication event that helps or causes us to attach meaning. Thus, talk and the nonverbal messages that surround it facilitate your interpretation of the talk or information. Purposes of information. Information serves two main purposes: creating understanding and persuading. If the aim is creating understanding, then it suggests how we are thinking, how and why we're acting, or even our emotional state. A second use of information is in persuasive messages. If your goal is to change the thoughts, feelings, or behavior of someone, you're sending persuasive messages. Relationship. We may define relationship as a series of encounters that forge a connection between two people, regardless of its source. Relationships may be permanent, such as family, or transitory. Now we've learned about the evolution of communication and interpersonal communication. We've also learned a number of terms that relate to these concepts, as well as communication models that help us understand the communication process and interpersonal communication. Thank you.